Namaskara. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to you all seated here in the room at MAP, and as well to our audience online. Hopefully, some of you are in Brazil, South Africa, Switzerland, beyond India. My name is Jonas Brunswig. I am the CEO of Swissnex in India and Consul General of Switzerland. And I am delighted to have the chance to introduce tonight's event to you. Before I do so, I want to say a couple of words about Swissnex, who we are and what we do. We are what I like to call a diplomatic anomaly. We are a rather unique governmental entity whose mission is to connect Switzerland, India, and the world in education, research, and innovation. And our vision is really to strive to accelerate positive transformations at the frontiers of knowledge. And of course, tonight is not just about looking forward, but it is also about looking back. Because what future would we have if we did not look at our past and try to learn from it? This event is carried out, of course, in partnership with MAP, Museum of Art and Photography, to whom we're very grateful for hosting us tonight. And it's carried out in partnership with the Museum für Gestaltung in Zurich. This is the leading Swiss design and visual arts museum of Switzerland. It's based in Zurich, and it is currently celebrating its 150th anniversary. And so as part of this 150th anniversary, the museum has decided to partner with Swissnex on a series of dialogues that look at design in a collaborative way. And of course, today we're looking at it through the lens of the Global South. I'm usually not one to read speeches, and I promise I only have one paragraph that I'm going to read. And I ask for your forgiveness because I know that today is not about architecture, but I'm using a metaphor and a link to architecture to try to frame and give my introduction. So, design in the Global South is often drawn like a monsoon blueprint, sketched in chalk, knowing the rain will come. It's a little bit like today. It embraces impermanence not as a flaw, but as a fact of life. This sensibility, beautifully embodied in the work of Geoffrey Bava, who taught us that buildings should breathe with the land, not sit on it. His verandas blur into gardens, his corridors catch the wind, and his courtyards open to the sky, responding more to monsoon clouds than modernist codes. In this region, design is less about control and more about choreography of light, humidity, memory, and movement. It is adaptive, seasonal, and inseparable from the lives that pass through it. Today, as we revisit the legacy of European modernism, this dialogue invites us to consider not just its ideals, but how those ideals have been reinterpreted, re-weathered, and sometimes rewilded by the Global South. And with that, I am happy to hand over the floor digitally to Zurich, to Sophie Grossmann, who is a curator at the Museum für Gestaltung, for her opening remarks. Over to you, Sophie.
Thank you so much for these beautiful words. I'm always astounded, or not astounded, but so happy to hear other people speaking and quoting so beautiful from wise minds that sometimes looking at my script, I wish I could adapt it and redo it, but I think that's just how working in the arts and in creative ways is that when you get to the end, you wish you could start over again and do it differently or alternatively. So thank you to Jonas and also to Divya from Swissnex India and the Museum for Art and Photography for hosting this event. I will just quickly share an introduction with you to this global initiative between the Museum für Gestaltung Zürich as well as the Swissnex network. Please forgive me if I repeat certain remarks that Jonas already made. I would also like to extend my thank yous to Bhavana Kumar, Nicola la Noce, who are there in the auditorium with you, to Matheus Leston from Brazil, and Osmond Tshuma, who is in New York currently, for speaking today about their work, their artistic practices, and insights. And of course, also thank you to Ishita Shah for preparing and moderating our discussion today. As Jonas mentioned, my name is Sophie. I'm an art historian by training. I work as a research associate at the Museum für Gestaltung, and I'm the initiator and curator of this global project, as well as the co-curator for the upcoming exhibition in Zurich at the Museum für Gestaltung called Museum of the Future, 17 Digital Experiments, where the projects from this initiative will be presented for the first time. To very shortly introduce our museum, as part of the Zurich University of the Arts, or ZHDK, as we shorten it to, the Museum für Gestaltung is involved, besides exhibiting, also in research, teaching, and we issue our own publications. It reaches a broad and global audience through our locations in Zurich, but also through traveling exhibitions and the digital space. And I would like to introduce more specifically our e-museum, which is a pioneering example of digital curation, where academics, curators, designers, artists, and collectors can explore over 125,000 works, making it Switzerland's largest online database for design and art. And as Jonas mentioned, this year is a very special occasion for us because we're celebrating our 150th anniversary. The museum was started in 1875 with the decorative arts collection, and it was a reason for us to look back. We just opened a new permanent exhibition of our collection, as well as to the future. And it was also my motivation to enhance our engagement with the collection that we have, which has over 500,000 of objects, by collaborating with designers and artists from Brazil, China, India, Japan, the US, and South Africa. 6 creatives, scouted in partnership with Swissnex, have created new works in dialogue with pieces from our collection, which will then be featured in the exhibition Museum of the Future, starting in August. 4 of these extraordinary contributors you are meeting tonight, and their exhibits that they have developed and produced. Bhavana, Nicola, Matheus, and Osmond. They offer a fresh and creative way to engage with the physical objects in our collection and their historical context, while reflecting current discourses and contemporary approaches, and revive the collection's original mission to serve as a source of inspiration and a hub of knowledge. Besides the exhibition in Zurich and a smaller one during the World Exhibition in Osaka, Japan, and together with partners across the Swissnex network, a series of 4 international events were organized, today being unfortunately the final one. And within those, we explored design's multifaceted role in preserving memory, fostering cultural dialogue, and addressing ecological and social imperatives. From reimagining traditional crafts with digital technologies and AI at the World Exhibition in Osaka, to harnessing the emotive power of sound and cultural heritage in San Francisco and Shanghai, the global histories of modernism in Zurich and Sao Paulo, and today, a reflection on archiving and historiography on the questions how and what gets remembered. These gatherings illuminate how art and design shape our collective future while honoring our diverse pasts. Together, they inspire a global conversation about creativity's power to connect, transform, and sustain. Thank you again to everyone involved. And I'm very much looking forward to our discussion today.
Thank you so much, Sophie. I'm now excited to introduce our moderator, Ishita Shah, who will set some more context for this discussion.
Yeah, so makes sense to introduce myself, or just very briefly, I'm an interior designer and an architectural historian who's turned into a curator for cultural preservation projects. And you can find out more about the work we do under the Aegis of Curating for Culture. It's a self-founded collective. And that is to say that perhaps we have had similar processes, experiences, is why both Swissnex in India and MAP has entrusted me with this responsibility of hopefully steering the conversation without taking away too much from the project, the artist, and their processes. So thank you for having me here. And I hope the conversation is as enriching for all of you as much as it has been for me to unpack, understand what all the artists and the curators have shared with me. On that note, I think how we have sort of thought about the flow of the conversation is really to take you through the projects, their processes, in conversation with each other. So bear with us. You might feel that you are in and out of different projects and processes. And we will, I hope, that you'll be able to weave it together. All of you who are here with us, but also those who are online, they will share their work, the artists, and eventually from these nuances, we would want to come to talking about the meta questions, some which both Sophie and Johannes have pointed out for us already. So to begin with, we wanted to know about the practices of the three artists, designers who are with us, but not perhaps in the most conventional ways. And we basically wanted to know what is the shift or the movement that came about in their usual practice as a designer, as an architect, as an artist, when this collaboration sort of put them in a new space or in a different space. And how will it influence their practices from here on, immediately or later on in the future? And the artists will sort of pass on the baton. They sort of know the order, and then we'll move on with the questions. So I think it's over to Osmond.
Hello, everybody. I'm Osmond Tshuma. I am honored to be speaking here today, tonight, this morning. I know like different time zones of people are watching. So this project was almost like a 50-50 balance for me. It really nicely plugged in with my practice, with a nice little push of a different approach at the end. My practice on its own, it's always about celebrating like the African identity. So then using the cultures around me, learning from them, and then creating something out of that. So even with my past works, so this is a project that I did some previous years where literally I'm referencing cultural sculptures, cultural mosque, and then literally extracting from that elements to be able to create something. And with this work, I'm always creating for the people who are going to view it. I'm not creating for anybody else. So like that is always the intent. So then when it came to this project, literally looking at Peter Pike's work and my work, it was literally quite similar, whereby it is both for social justice. Whereas when I now started looking more deeper into Peter's work, it was more about uplifting other people's voices. Whereas for my work, it's mostly looking at the work and the cultures, but this idea of uplifting other people's voices, using his technique, that was very quite interesting. Something that I had never used other people's voices. So then that became something very quite powerful, like for me to try and preserve. So then when we then look at my work, it's always this thing of my voice, and then the voice of the object, the ceremony or the place, and then I extract from that space an inspiration. When then for now, it then became the voice of Peter Piax, the technique, But instead of my voice, it then became the voices of the three people. So the Nelson Mandela, Noce, Butuma, and then Alice Mpolo, right? And then what I then did was now that's the separation between my work and then this work. It's these three people's voices and Peter Piek's technique, and I take the back seat. I then play the mediator in a way that one is able to identify the codes and one is also able to identify the technique. I am just revealing what's been there, and that is quite something that is quite different. My work is very much communal, but in this case, it almost amplifies it to almost like allow me to take the back seat and actually allow other people's voices be more louder. Which is almost like sitting in Peter Piek's seat, in a type of way. So yeah, like that is how similar, but not similar. The works also, hence why I'm saying it was a 50-50 balance. And yeah, definitely. I think that approach is literally going to change how I create work, and already it has already started changing, because even now, the projects that I'm looking at are much more communal, whereby my voice takes a back seat and I'm just amplifying. Yeah.
Hello, everybody. My name is Bhavana Kumar. I'm an architect. I'm one half of Kumar la Noce, along with Nicola la Noce. The title of our project is for the Museum for Gestaltung is Arama. Are you comfortable? Arama is a casual greeting in Kannada, which translates to, are you comfortable? The title of our project, the project itself, is an exploration set in Bangalore, built around the question of comfort, of being rested, both as constructs of physical space and objects, as well as ephemeral gestures and emotional gestures. It starts with an object that facilitates comfort and is also called comfort. The Fauteuil Grand Comfort by Charlotte Perriand. Now, where this exploration led us is what the project is about. We'll show you a short excerpt from the project and then talk a little bit more about the idea behind it. Comfortable chair became our muse, an external metal cage enclosing voluptuous leather cushions, which one could sink into. What is comfort? While her sketchbooks and writings reveal a meticulous study, for Charlotte, the question was both technical and deeply human. We discovered Charlotte's photographs of people in their context, sitting, relaxing, working. She used photography as a journal, quite like we use it in contemporary times. These observations came back into her design process. Never forget that the purpose of a place or an object is to be human, she said. So on the question of comfort, where does it reside? Can the Grand Comfort armchair become a portal that opens up connections between different worlds of comfort? Permanent and transient, museum and street, rational and irrational, iconic and everyday, Charlotte and us. So through her photographs, we tried to enter Charlotte Perriand's world, to sense how she saw and what she saw in it. Charlotte became our fictional guide. In an article that she wrote, Charlotte spoke about furniture as resting machines. What is his house to be, she asked. Resting machines. And back in Baswangudi, we found many resting machines. Some of them were adopted leftovers of urban infrastructure, and others were carefully fashioned appendages to support pleasant repose. What gives beauty and truth to these objects is that they serve. The people spontaneously created these objects in response to their needs, she said. So channeling Charlotte's curiosity in the world around her, we started recording comfort. Aram, in all its different ways. Some of them were notional, some of them personal, but we tried to understand what comfort meant to human beings. And this is what occupied Charlotte as well, objects in relation to human beings.
So hi, everyone. I think it's my time now to talk a little bit about my work. And first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is such an honor. And to answer the question that was posed quite clearly, for me, it was a big change in my practice to do this piece for Museum für Gestaltung. I'm mostly a musician. I always described myself as a musician and artist, but nowadays I'm not sure about that anymore. Not sure which one of the two should come first. But I'm always dealing with the connection between image and sound. That was my main practice concern for my whole life, how to connect sound and image. And when I do that, I mostly use programming languages and this sort of new media, art and technology. There are lots of names for those things, right? But I always try to use some sort of data collection to do that. So when I began this project, and the first idea was to look at the e-museum to see what I liked, what I enjoyed, my first idea, my main concept was to use all the data that was available to me to make connections, to try to find out what I can find about the collection itself by just connecting all the data that they had in the collection. But then I decided to look for Brazilian artists in the collection, Brazilian designers, and I found that there are three of the biggest names there that are really important: Mari Vieira, Mavinier, and Alexandre Wollner. Those three, they have quite a lot of they had quite a lot of impact in Brazil. But the story that I found most interesting was that from all those three, actually, Wollner is the most important one for Brazilians, for us Brazilians. He created a design language that really stuck with us, and that is one of the most important designers in the history of Brazilian design. He is the guy. And the two of those authors, Mavinier and Mari Vieira, although there are a lot of pieces in the collection of the museum, they are not as relevant in Brazilian history, on design history. So this is the story that I wanted to tell. And there is also another part of the story, which is Brazilians' connection with Max Bill. And of course, Max Bill, there are a lot of pieces by Max Bill in the collection, but there is also something else quite important. This is an exhibition of Max Bill's work here in Brazil, here in São Paulo. And this was like a very, very important exhibition for us. This piece that you can see here, the big one, which is called The Tripartite Unity, actually was presented in the first Bienal here in São Paulo. And it won the prize of sculpture. And it is often regarded as the beginning of the concrete movement here in Brazil. And this is a story that I was not able to tell by data. Data was not enough. I couldn't just say that my perspective by only looking at a data set that there is in the Museum für Gestaltung. I couldn't tell the Brazilian perspective with the data set. I can tell what is missing, but I need to tell that. So the biggest shift for me was that this piece became sort of a video essay. And what I had to do, which is in the next slide, is that I had to write text, to tell my story, to tell my perspective, and to compare the Swiss perspective and the Brazilian perspective. So that's why my piece is called Duet, Counterpoint, Parallax. And that's why it is all the time divided in half. So in one side is the Swiss perspective, and it is written in German. And the other side is the Brazilian perspective, and it's written in Portuguese. I try to say as least as I can, because I think the data can show itself and can really present what I'm trying to say with the data itself, but I need to make some appointments throughout the work to show this discussion about collecting, how different it is from the Swiss perspective, looking at Brazil, and Brazil perspective, looking at Switzerland, looking at Brazil. So that is the main gist of my work.
Thank you so much for these brief but intriguing introductions. So just for all of us to assimilate this, the artist and the designer sort of brought stories together of Peter Peach, of Charlotte and Wallner. But they also brought stories together of identity, emotions, and connections. Now, these words are not very new to a design process. I think most of you would agree that they are very usual words for a creative process. So that brings me to my next question to them, that why was it important to look back in time? Why was it important to look into history? How did they reinterpret what were their challenges and their aspirations of looking into an archive, which is, of course, across borders. They themselves didn't have access to it, and including that or incorporating that into a creative process. So Matheus, if you could continue and take us through.
Of course. So just as a brief introduction, what I did was I first, in this regard of archiving, I decided to look for another archive here in Brazil that I can trying to connect with the Swiss archive that I was using, which was the E-Museum and the Museu für Gestaltung. So what I did is that I looked for the Fundação Bienal de São Paulo here, which is actually a documentation archive. Bienal doesn't have any kind of collection, and this is the kind of you can play the file. It's okay, please. So this is a bit of my work. As you can see, I'm comparing the images from both archives. So my way of dealing with the archive was this, trying to make comparisons between what can be seen here in São Paulo and Bienal and what can be seen in the Swiss archive. But I thought that that wasn't enough. And I needed, like, this is a very institutional view of the material, and I decided to go to Google as well. So here you can see I'm comparing the results for Max Bill in Google in Switzerland and Google in Brazil, and how different they are. So this is the sort of things that I try to do, like using data, as I said, to engage with those archives. But the most important thing was to try to see what is missing. So for instance, in Wallner, there is a lot of things that are missing. So to say about this idea of looking to the past to be able to look at the future, for me, what is most interesting is what is missing from the archives. And to be honest with you, Brazilian history of design is really not made. It's really not created until now. The design history in Brazil is really bad because we don't even have the objects itself. The objects are being lost, and they are being posters from history and design pieces and so on. They are not really well documented, and this is something that is starting to grow in Brazil nowadays. But I think it's we don't have an archive to look at in a way. We don't have this collection of pieces. So in a way, my piece is sort of showing those fractures, and this can be a point to the future, to show what is missing, to show what we are not looking at, and maybe we should. So with the Wallner, I did the same thing. I compared it, and you can see there is not that many pieces. As I said, there is just one piece in the Museu für Gestaltung, which is this poster of the Bienal. And in Brazil, in Fundação Bienal, there is nothing about his designs. But then, if we look at the Google search, which is the next one, then you can see how deep his designs is, and how much of a designer, an important designer for Brazilian day-to-day life he was. So in a way, my way of looking into the future through this piece was, first of all, looking at what we what we are missing nowadays, and then looking at what was going to happen, which is the next part of my work that I can show a little bit afterwards.
So my work, I'm always trying to pull from the archive, like wherever I can. I can say I'm quite new to the archive, but I've been trying. And before talking about this project, working with archives can sometimes be very much hard because you cannot really touch the objects, or like getting the access to it is very also hard. But I think also sometimes the accessibility of the internet, sometimes can help. And for me, it's always pulling from the past, and literally me as a graphic designer. My role is to try and change how graphic design looks like, from the Eurocentric standpoint of this is how it's supposed to look like. For me, it is influenced by things that I grew up with, things that I'm seeing every day outside of my father's parents, my grandfather's parents, So it's literally when people grow up, they're able to recognize that, wait, like design isn't just Eurocentric. So then with archive comes in is giving us that access point of certain images, certain things that I'm able to reference as a graphic designer, as you can see with some of this project right here, whereby I might not be able to physically see this photograph, but because it is available on open source, I'm able to use it without being sued, hopefully. Um, and and that is where, like, I feel like the power of being able to access these things is vital. And I think most of the time we end up just perpetuating the same visual style of graphic design or visual culture, right? But for me, it's always about how do we decolonize and create things that look like us, that look like us, or systems or cultures like us. So with this project, the goal was to elevate the voices, one, and also the voices of the artist Peter Piak, and also the voices of the activist. I then get it come in as a graphic activist myself by bringing these two together. The same system, the same pattern that I'm doing with other commercial work that I'm creating, which is a design of a logo, but referencing an archival something, you know what I mean? That is what I did here. And I think being able to access the past literally helps us, I'll say, as graphic designers, being able to see other forms that we aren't used to. And most of my work is very much quite detailed. Because my surroundings are very much detailed. My surroundings are very much emotional. They very much has got so much history. So for me, it is, as much as sometimes we like to simplify things as graphic designers, for me, it is embedding those stories. Because sometimes when things get archived, they don't get archived with the whole story. Sometimes it's just the image in its own, the one little portion. And sometimes also very hard to work with those elements. Whereas for Peter Piak's collection, it was very quite vast, being able to read all these different quotes from various people, from Martin Luther King to like all different our voices were being preserved in the archive. So for me, also, I was able to then not just look at just the political part, but also the land issues and also the inequalities. So even the three pieces that I ended up creating also spoke about that. And the voices are also voices of issues of now, not issues of the back. But I'm using Peter Piak's style as a way of saying, this is how Peter Piak used to create, and this is my own interpretation of that. And then also another layer of adding animation, this emotion of how almost like a protest, so yeah.
I would like also to connect with the previous question, because especially for us as architects, they're very much connected. So the idea of how this project has shaped our way of working, or how it's going to shape in the future, and the archiving process. So in a way, so this is basically this is from the archiving of Connected with Charlotte Perriand, and how she has this affinity with the great outdoors, and yeah, basically capturing these photographs, of found objects on the outdoor spaces, which she called them as art brut, because are sort of found mostly on the seaside. And so there is a process of archiving. And so in our case, the idea of archiving can be the starting point of a project or the ending point. So how this project affected us is that basically, as architect, we start from the virtual world, and then we move into a slightly more touchable process, which is the idea of researching and then starting working on drawings. So 2D process, 3D process, physical models, virtual models, until we reach the real world, which is the world of building something and then engaging with people. Whereas for this project, the idea almost completely shifted. So from the real world of interacting with the streets of Basfangudi, and in general interacting with the idea of arama, so the comfort, and then moving into a more virtual process. There is exactly this work, this video that came up. So and there was a process in a way of archiving at the beginning, which was taking pictures, taking videos, understanding what goes in, what is the meaning of, what is the meaning of what we are capturing, and how is this connected with the principle of Aram and the beginning, Charlotte Perriand. But at the same time, archiving as architects is an ending process. So when you work on a variety of projects throughout your career, and it's not our case because we are a young firm, but in case of and it's happening very much across our field. So especially firms of 30, 40, 50 years old, they're able to collect all the work done throughout the years, all the projects. And we're talking about drawings, physical models. We're talking about a lot of other things. So that's an ending process, right? And that's never ending. So you can use it archiving to actually produce something. In this case, it's what some architects call it as a live archiving. So it just gets updated through the years when the projects are finished. So in this case, archiving it's a very important process that we have used at the beginning of our process, and it very much affects the work we do as professionals as well. And it's something that, like I said, it's a live process, so it literally never stops.
So looking at the e-museums archives, in trying to find Charlotte within that, I think was itself a process and a journey that was quite different from, say, actually visiting a museum. Because for me, I think what an e-museum or archives in general have the power to flatten the landscape of, and make it a more user-discovered journey, to connect the dots, to find stories. Osmond mentioned, how archival material often do not tell the whole story, but I think that's also the advantage of exploring archives, because then you can build your own connections, your own stories. So the few glimpses that you get of our project here, you can see connections being made, from Charlotte to Comfort to Aram to Baswangudi to ours, physical comfort, etc. So I think that's the beauty of archives. They're unfinished stories, and it allows you to make your own narratives through engaging with it. It's not defined by curated space or a particular kind of selection of objects put out.
Basically, this question was meant to sort of reflect on their processes, open up the ways in which the artists have really interpreted the archival objects, or even the larger intent of an archive. And I'm actually quite thrilled that you sort of affirm my reading of your works in a way where there's a need or an urge to destabilize. There is a break that you're taking from the conventional, even if it means the conventional approach to an archive. It need not be just destabilizing the conventional approach to design or a creative process. I really appreciate, I think, when you connect the dots, because Matheus talks about questioning the institutional view of an archive versus what Google sort of came up with, right? And there is so much right now of a conversation about collective memory and public memory. And from there, Osmond took us to looking at decolonizing history and making it more relevant to different contexts, which perhaps you have been doing it with your work already. And this project emphasizes more on that. And Bhavana and Nicola sort of bringing us back to the unfinished stories of an archive. So archive needs more interpreters is where I'm going with this, right? They cannot exist only if they continue to safeguard. They need to be used. Quoting some other artists, they need to be misused as well. Those disruptions are welcome, as much as the disruptions in the usual creative processes are welcome. And that brings me to the last question of this segment, which is, because we were responding to the current times, I want to presume that we are aware of the cultural fragilities around us. And you're positioning this work in the current context. But you're also given a mandate or a brief to think about futuristic practice, speculate. What was that relationship? What was that dialogue between the futuristic imagination and addressing the cultural fragilities of now, as well as what role then technology plays in making such processes possible or not? So back to you guys, and then take it forward from there.
I like this image because it's literally technology at his, fingertips. But there's also a lot of other things that that are in that space. Comfort is an assemblage. Favorite gods are a must. At the beginning of this project, we discussed technological tools that we would use, because this was, after all, a digital experiment. So what would that be? We started this process of collecting, recording, and making content that we would do something about or something with. And then the tools were a question, what would we use? We'll think about it later. But as we started doing this, it was not about what we would do with the material, but it was, in fact, what we are with the material. It soon became quite clear also after discussions with Sophie, that maybe we don't need that velvet rope between what was being collected, captured, made connections with, and what it would be in the end. So for me, the use of technology here is what we are. It's about the contemporary. What does it mean to be contemporary? It is to use technology in the current moment. And here, I think it was also very much inspired by Charlotte, because this woman 100 years ago used photography the way we are using it now, something like that. So she used it to record everyday moments and people in their contexts, interesting rocks and bark and whatnot. And so I think to answer your question, and going back to Charlotte, I think the way she captured people and groups of people and activities shows a lot of compassion. She was compassionate about the world around her. So essentially, for us, the project is the technology that is already embedded in our lives, and it's already part of our lives. Most of these records were made walking back and forth between home and office and school, with one hand while holding one of our daughters with the other. So that is the technology, right? The entire thing is shot on our phones, and we were able to do that because we are here right now in this moment, and we're that's what technology means to us. But I do think that, talking about the future, I think our role as artists and as designers is to question the technology that is currently with us and use it compassionately. I mean, use it to remove boundaries and make new connections. And that's what we tried doing here somehow.
Yeah. So it's I mean, the question is very interesting because we actually started from technology, because this chair represents the one of the most successful pieces of design because of technology. So it represents the kind of language of almost 100 years ago, when, collaboration between Charlotte Perriand, Corbusier, and Pierre Generet, it's basically, it represents how at those times metal was getting developed still. So the kind of design, the junctions, the finishing, the idea, that those corners have no support. It's not a typical chair. It's not a typical 4 legs on the corners, and it's not a wooden chair, for example. But it represents what technology at those times were doing, which is pushing the boundaries of design and comfort. So the question that basically Perriand asked herself and her team was, what is comfort? How do we achieve comfort through a beautiful piece of design that is pure technology? And how do we exploit the technology at those times to achieve something that is absolutely new? And if we connect, for example, with a modernist period at those times, Marcel Breuer was working on a couple of years previous on a beautiful set of chairs, during the Bauhaus period that actually, Walter Gropius used in his office in Dessau. And those were, again, amazing pieces of technology because they completely utilized the material to create something that is actually what we are sitting right now. No, it's basically, it's a cantilever piece of design that has no support in the back. And so for us, the starting point, looking at the e-museum and looking at that piece of chair is exactly about technology and how technology influenced comfort, and and then how we use this almost 100 years later to produce basically this video. So there is a sort of link somehow, although it's not straightforward, but that's how also we see the connection of technology, in our project?
So for me, the way of thinking about technology and looking at the future was in this piece, the third and final part of the piece is looking at the logos that Alexandre Wollner have created and what is happening with them now. So we looked at the archive, which is the past and how it's understood the past in history. Now I'm looking at the present. And by looking at the present, what I found was that many of his logos and his designs are dying, are being thrown away, are being changed, are being updated in a weird fashion. So this is an elevator, a very famous brand of elevator. And I just kept looking for those things. And this is like one of the most talked about logos that Wollner created. I think you can see why. And it is still the same. So what I found was that many of the institutional logos are the same of museums, of big institutions, but the brands, the commercial logos have almost all of them have changed. So I'm not a designer and I can't tell you exactly what will happen in the future, but I think that by looking at this, it seems that this design practice and creation of design, although we think in a very idealized way and in a very conceptual way, when it got to the world and when it's applied, I think design is about that, of course. The connection with money and the connection with sales and the connection with all those kinds of things is absurd. So as you can see, the institutionals, the cultural institutions and the art institutions, the logos have changed, but you can see almost all of the brands and the commercial things that are sold, they changed because they are adapting to the times. And this is one of my favorite ones, by the way. This is a can of tuna, and the logo is awful. As you can see right now, it looks really, really ugly. And it was really beautiful before. Just to talk about technology, and I think this is one of the most debatable changes in Wollner's design. And just to give you a context, this is a bank, the biggest bank in Brazil, the biggest private bank in Brazil, which is called Itaú. And the logo now, as you can see, has changed, I think, 2 years ago. And it is much more rounded and it's more, I don't know, it has a little fun to it, and it's orange and blue, while the older one was just very stark, very rigid. And because Itaú really means black stone in a native Brazilian language. The thing is, this logo, the original logo, was designed because at the time what was being used was paper. It was like stamps on paper, and making a logo just black and white and very stark and very clear made sense because we were using checks and so on. But now we are using the banking in the mobile phones. And now it's another idea. It's a completely different idea of what good design is. So then it became orange. Then it became a different kind of contrast, because now we are not looking at paper anymore. We are looking at a cell phone screen, a mobile phone screen. So design has changed because technology has changed as well, and not the other way around. So I would like to point out that I love technology. As you can see here in my studio, I have 4 computers. You have a big server here. I have a lot of equipment. As you can see, I really work with that. That's what I think I express myself. But I really loved something that Bhavana said, that we need to question technology. And there is a saying that I really, really take to my heart from a Brazilian musician called Tom Zé. And he says that the equipment and technology reproduces the current mainstream. And I think that makes a lot of sense. So if you go to, I can use my experience as a musician. If you go to a studio and you just use the equipment as it is intended and with the presets that are readily available, you are going to produce the standard mainstream pop music, because that's the sound of the equipment. Because of course, technology is being developed to foster whatever is current and whatever is the mainstream thing, of course, because those are being created to be sold. So for selling purposes, it makes sense to create things that reproduce the mainstream. So in a way, I can see that the same thing happens with the history of design. And I think for me, the way looking forward is not to be against technology or anything like that, but to be very aware of where it comes from and what is the historical development of the technologies that we use. And I use technologies in plural because I don't think there is just one technology, right? I think there are many different technologies. So to be aware of why those things exist, why, for instance, we are now in this time of AI, why this exists, how it is being built, and what can we do that? I'm not against AI in any shape or form, but I think we need to be aware of the context in which it's being created, which is mostly connected to money at the end of the day. So this is really important for us to make the step forward, I believe.
Like for me, every time that I think about the future, I think about a future whereby, you know, every voice is included. You know, there's no one design style. You know, like even in architecture, in product design, you know, there's no one thing because not one fits every single thing. And for this project, I think because at the end, with the help of my friend Sachi Mehta, the posters are animated. I think which is a powerful thing because I think if you were to go back and look at Peter Pieck's work, in its essence, they're actually protest posters, you know, and the thinking of a protest, you know, in the Southern African context, you know, people march on the streets, you know, people hold placards, there's audio, there's sounds, there's chanting, there's motion, there's activity. And sometimes when we do posters, they're very quite static. And these quotes, some of them are long. And I think with the power of motion, there is that pull and push and emphasis on certain words. And I think that is that added power of, you know, if I can say technology to my work. I really do motion design. I really do animation. So most of my stuff is quite static. Most people know my work. It's mainly because of brand identities. But also I think because of Peter Park's style of and I think it was very important to have that added layer of an animation because then it almost makes the poses themselves as if it's a product piece, you know, which is what it is, you know. Something separate from, okay, cool, here are posters, but here aren't just videos, you know, a 1 minute video. This is actually a protest poster, which is 1 minute. And I think for me, when it comes to archiving, that is what it is. We are archiving culture, voices, events, you know, and then through my work, I hopefully I'm able to archive the past in modern graphic design so that in the future, people can look back and say, oh, Osmond has done some body of work that celebrates the African identity that we can also now reference again. So most of the times I see myself more as as just one piece of the system or a new system that other people are able to take on the baton and continue, which is almost the same again as an archive. You know, one person starts the archive and other people come in, almost very quite communal. So these pieces of works, I think nowadays I'm very enjoying and pieces of works that I'm like, I should have done this, you know. It almost feels like another edit idea could have been sound again. But again, you know, as Sophie said, every single time, as an artist, when you do something, you'll be like, oh, shit, if given more time, I could have, And I guess that's the power of that, But again, it's the power of the archive, Maybe right now you're seeing them without audio, and then maybe in the next few years you might be able to see them with actually edited audio, maybe of the same audio or maybe different audio from a different event that just makes everything meet, clash, or be literally in conversation with them. But I think for me, it is preserving voices, culture, events. Yeah. And allowing us to have more voices, not just one static voice. I think that for me, that's the most important part.
Thank you, Osmond. And I think the way we have sort of gone about the flow or planning of this, there was an intent that, Osmond, you would bring us to this point about what is your politics behind the design that you do. And I think I want to now throw it back open to Bhavana, Nicola, and Matheus. What is it when you think about these collaborations that you have gone through? The collaboration with the museum, with the curator, with the different artists from across different places in the, if I might call it, the global south, and maybe collaborations within yourselves as well. Did it help you identify your politics, even if it's for a minute or two, or even if it's something that you're going to read further about and you think as a designer you would take it forward? How would you?
I feel like I answered part of it in the last comment that I made, that at this point where we are in the world and the state of affairs, I do think that compassion and removing boundaries is paramount to how we live. Unwanted boundaries, I would say. And I think this project, the most interesting thing about this project was the brief itself, that each of us had the same starting point, that is to look at the e-museum and explore the archives and come up with a project that made sense in our world. There was also, I think, a sort of added layer that we should be aware where it's coming from. So, each of our projects, whether it's Bangalore or Sao Paulo or, Johannesburg, I think there was this added layer. And it's fascinating to see how each of these different trajectories have taken shape with just the same starting point. And there is so much personality in each project. I think each of us has put ourselves back into the mix. I would say this is also thanks to Sophie, who really at one point, encouraged us to put ourselves into the project and make it our own. And which is why I also said that the thing about an archive and, exploring an archive, for me, what I discovered at the end of the project was that it allows you to make your own stories, your own connections, and it takes you on paths that you probably didn't imagine, right? So I think that is the most interesting thing about this exercise in general.
And since we mentioned Sophie, and I think bringing back Sophie's thoughts and the museum before I hand it over to Matheus, because Sophie brought out this point very interestingly, that there was a need for plurality even in curatorial voices. So while Osmond, you did mention that there are so many more voices for which designers should work, and I keep bringing two sides of the table for us to think about, that even archives and museums do need more versions of the same story, of the same archive to come in, even if they are in contradiction, even if they're in conflict. And Matheus, I think in your work, it reflects quite clearly. I mean, that's the duality I feel that you are presenting. And I think the question was really, what does it mean for it to share space? So you have done it in a digital space. Eventually, we're going to sort of you all are going to sort of see the works come together in different space, in the same space in the museum. So this plurality of voices, one that comes on screen as a space, and when you imagine the space as a physical space in a museum, where a lot more is going to happen as a part of the 150th year celebration, how did that guide your process? Were you thinking about public and perception? And of course, this question, we'll open it up to Osmond and Bhavana, Nicola as well.
Yeah, for sure. I do think about that a lot. I think that's how I construct all my works. I'm not an artist that creates work that are meant to live in the realm of the ideas. I think really well, it's funny to say that, but really in the concrete sense of the term, like of the piece, and the piece in the screen, in the room, the size of the screen, what will be next to it. This is very important for me. This is actually how people will relate to the work. And I think it comes from the fact that I worked quite a lot of years in the educational department of a few museums here in Brazil, of big museums, including the Bienal itself. So to see how people react to the work, for me, is the most important thing ever. And for me, what I try to do with this work is, when we are talking before, I think Nicola said something that really inspired me to talk about this as well, which is, how can we visualize data? As you said, data is like something that is on the internet, is in the air. It's like something so abstract, right? So how can I make it palpable in a way, and hearable? So that's what my work is about, in a way, trying to make those things concrete and make those things to be seen, like to be almost touched. So how much of the light the screen will project into the room, how the sound also represents the amount of images that are in the collection. So for me, it's sort of, the work itself is about the materiality of the work itself, in a way. So how can I hear the data, and how different it is when you hear the data and you compare those two corpuses, or how they sound different. So this is very important for me. It's a way to try to make it as a material, to make it as an object. But to connect with the previous question you had, I think they are really connected, because there is a question, a very important question, about archiving and the archiving neutrality, right? How an archival can be neutral. Is it neutral? I think it's pretty impossible. So it's every collection, every choice that we make, even if we add more voices, as Osmond said, which is absolutely necessary for every archive, for sure. And it is still just part of the whole story, and just a representation of something which is not the thing itself, right? So we need to always think about this representation. And my work, although it seems very, very strict and very rigorous and very data-driven, it is actually not neutral at all. There is just a very stark narrative in it. So in a way, I'm doing I have a critical point of view of the archive that I'm also falling into, and I'm aware that I'm falling into the same critic. So that's important for me.
Osmond, do you want to add to that question?
Yes. Yeah. I think as a graphic designer, I think it's very hard to create work without thinking of how people are going to think of it. Like I think even separate from this, I think just a simple logo, what I mean, like people will have opinions, and for me with this project, it was very much about like, are we able to, like, when people look and engage with this work, are they able to realize, one, that this is Peter Piag's style, one, and also are they able to say to realize that, okay, cool, so this is a quote from Nelson Mandela, this is a quote from this person, and talk about these issues, and I think for me those are the most important part. Whether they realize that it was done by me, like that really doesn't matter. I think for me, what's most important is this elevation of these voices, I think that for me was the most important part. It's a celebration of Peter Peck's work. It is an addition of my help to the fight that is being done by these three voices. You know, I am just coming in to almost like give a little push on the vehicle that is already moving. You know what I mean? It's moving. It can keep on moving even without me, but I'm just a little nudge in the system. And for me, it's that, right? And the animation does add on another element of that action that happens at a protest. And yeah, like for me, it was literally hopefully that people don't see me in the work. I think that was also one of the things that I'm not part of the work, but it's more of, oh, Peter Peck's work. Oh, no. It is a reinterpretation of Peter Peck's work, you know. Yeah, you know, almost like, yeah, because we forget, you know, there's so much things that are happening in the world of design and graphic design that we forget some of these names and some of these works, you know what I mean? Because now there's more things, now there's AI, you know. But I think through this, it's almost like, oh yeah, oh yes, Peter Peck's work. Oh yeah, I haven't looked at that for a long time. So that is that, you know, this a little bit of igniting, you know, just yeah, no, I remember I do have a Peter Peck's book, you know, like that is what sometimes what is needed, you know what I mean? And when I was making this book, I was like, if I can be that little spark, not creating a flame, but the little nudge, I'm happy, you know, and I'm happy the work will be able to do that, you know, and be able to bring other artists or other designers to say, cool, they could also be that, you know, be able to be pushers and other causes out there. Yeah.
I think Matheus was talking about AI and you know how it's not necessarily a bad thing. I agree, but I do think that in the context of that, the personal voice, the voice of the designer or the architect or the artist, to come out, I think is the most important thing. And I'm not saying it in an egoistic way that you know it's me or somebody else, but I think to have that individual voice, to have a personal project out there that connects a few different things, is what will be the future of creation. And in that sense, the most important realization that we had, I think, in the process of this project is to make it a personal commentary, right? You are studying an archive, you are studying, you know, a person, you're studying a collection, but what does it mean in your context, and how can you kind of use your voice to sort of explore it? I think that becomes very important. So to be honest, in the end, the fact that this would be on a screen of this size, I mean, I think it was what was worrying me at the beginning. I think I asked a few different people, like, okay, how do I put this on a screen? And but that's the one that kind of melted away. It was the voice, it was the project, and people had to take it or leave it.
Yeah, can I take the liberty of saying that all three of the projects sort of bring their own context into play so beautifully. The places they belong to, the practices that they belong, that they sort of engage with, interweaves into their process quite seamlessly. It's not something that stays apart. Okay, I read the city this way, but then I did this, and then this happened. It just weaves in for all three of you, whether it's a city or a place or people. And the other connecting thing from this answer that I'm sort of taking away is that whatever be your interpretation and access to technology or to the archive, you have sort of worked towards making the unseen seen or visible, given or amplified some form of voice, even if it's data, right? The fact that we say that data cannot be visualized, you are giving it a visibility through your practice. And I think that's a lot for all of us to take away, that there is so much as an end product, even in these interpretative exploratory processes. So I'll come to my last question, I promise, and then we'll open it up and we'll have at least 15 minutes for all of us to talk together. I think it's only to address and provoke, perhaps, because I think the curatorial note had me thinking about ephemerality. And being a designer and a historian, I think I have a problem when people say there's ephemerality in design histories. I think it's in the way design is being practiced that so much becomes ephemeral, so much becomes lost, so much becomes difficult to grasp. There is a lot more to hold on to, and I think your processes show that so beautifully. So how did you interpret the word ephemerality or this question about ephemeral histories? And was that something that you grappled with or you accepted? And you can tell me where to find it. Whoever wants to go first. They can be just one word, one phrase answers also. You can just agree with me that you also didn't see it.
Well, I think that for me, what is there are two sides. There is a good one and a bad one, in a way. I think the bad side is that I take from this conversation particularly is what I said about how historically the history of Brazilian design is dying because it's not being properly made. So it's the bad side of ephemeral in a way that the design is dying and there is no documentation of it, and there is so this is the sort of ephemerality that I really don't like. Of course, there is also the good side of the thing. For instance, I had a discussion 2 days ago here in São Paulo about my work, and which was connected to this whole event in the university here of design. And people asked me if I would like to show my work elsewhere, to show here in São Paulo and somewhere else. And I thought for a bit, and I'm not sure, because in a way, it's a piece that is almost site-specific to the Museum für Gestaltung. It was created for this exhibition, for this time. Of course, we can share documentation of it and so on, but the piece itself may be ephemeral in the sense that it was created for this exhibition and it wouldn't work anywhere else. It is about the exhibition, right? So there is an ephemerality in this sense, which is, as I said about the screen and the sound and so on, the presence of a person looking at the piece and connecting with the piece, this is absolutely ephemeral, right? It's just a one thing. Maybe the piece can be documented and so on, but the experience is ephemeral. So this is something that I quite like. I think my works, that's why I work so much with generative art, which it changes all the time, and it's almost all the time it's the same, but all the time it's different. So it's all the time continuous and all the time ephemeral. So this is a sort of contradiction that I'm really into. I think that things that last forever, for instance, a generative piece, but anything is not replaceable and cannot be repeated again. So this is the sort of ephemerality thing that I really like to think about.
Should I go? Okay. So ephemeral design, basically we picked the piece that we picked from the museum, I would say is almost the opposite of being ephemeral, because it traces a line in the design history, because that piece is not only currently being produced, if I'm not wrong, but it's considered one of the most famous armchairs in design. So in this sense, it's the opposite of being ephemeral. It's a piece that still today is being studied, analyzed, copied, developed, and I think we can see almost daily in movies, in corporate places, or because that kind of design, it's been used in these kind of spaces. But yeah, I mean, it's a question that we keep asking ourselves about, the presence of design and how sometimes you can just access through exactly archives or the virtual world, because if it's, for example, in our case, it's an armchair. Either you access to it, you can sit on it if it's accessible, or otherwise you can't. So you need to access exactly the virtual world and understand, for example, the materials, the proportions. So I would say, yeah, basically we picked that piece exactly because it's very much related to our contemporary way of living, and is trying to ask the question of, for example, comfort. That is exactly what we are trying to ask ourselves. How are we comfortable in general, not just physically, but also mentally, and uh, in our souls. Are we comfortable? How are we going to be comfortable?
Yeah, yeah, and I also think my work is also very non-ephemeral. It is like the issues that are addressed by the courts are very much current, big issues, issues of human rights, issues of injustice, issues of land ownership. And some of these issues are issues that have been, like, for example, the issues of land has been going on for the past 100 years. Like the issues of inequality. So all these are issues that are really big issues that are societal, and that is affecting everybody, in Southern Africa. So yeah, and the body of work, I think it can sit everywhere, anywhere. I think what it does, it just shows another side of what's happening. I think, for example, like the issue of land, it's about protecting what is there, not pushing communities out. Yeah, and these are big topics that I'm pretty sure we're not gonna just resolve them tomorrow or next year, but I think we're gonna continue fighting up until maybe even in a few years, but we're like, oh, cool. It's finished. So I guess what these projects are literally like timestamps of the current issues that are happening now. So yeah, I think they're also non-ephemeral. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for those reflections. I think
I have
yes, please. Yeah.
short point to add. It's slightly parallel to this, but I think if you're talking about ephemeral design histories, women are a big part of the ephemeral part of design histories. If you look at the chair that the Grand Comfort, I think it's officially known as the LC, Le Corbusier 102, and whereas history says that the primary author was, of course, Charlotte Perriand. She was working with Le Corbusier in his office, but the entire project of furniture and interiors from the office was under her, and she was the primary author of the chair. So I think also throughout the last century, she more or less remained under the shadow of the men who were absolute champs. I love their work, but let's be honest. Here was this woman who literally, created the entire furniture archive from Le Corbusier's office, and she's only coming to fore now. I would say in the last 2 or 3 decades, there have been some retrospectives of her work, and as of this year, I think, or last year, Yves Saint Laurent reproduced some of her furniture, and Cassina kind of brought her name back into the thing. So women tend to become ephemeral, and I think that's something we need to be aware of.
I get where you're coming from, and I think that allows me to sort of clarify my thought further, just to say there's a difference between overshadowed and unseen histories, where definitely women and marginalized groups continue to picture and definitely provoke and probe us. And the ephemerality would be more to do with the transient nature of culture design. And how do we not mix these two as active cultural practitioners? What do we do to address both of them? So I did come from this need to sort of differentiate, because overshadowed histories definitely need us to start recognizing, giving more credit, whereas the ephemerality, the transient nature of culture needs us perhaps to be more collaborative, adaptive, musing, trans-border conversations and relationships. So maybe one is at the macro level, which is the ephemerality, and one is the micro level of the unseenness, which you all have addressed in your projects. So I was sort of, when I heard all three of you speak about, I was just reiterating how important it is, while we must design and we must create, but also to document, also to, so even if it's only going to work in a museum, how do you document and bring it to other places, perhaps? Or if you were to showcase it in Bangalore versus you were to showcase it in the museum, how does it get reinterpreted? And back to Osmond's point, how many more ways can we make works accessible? Right? So can these processes also be equally a part of, quote unquote, a creative professional's responsibility, and not just stop at start a project, finish it, deliver it, and be done with it? So this afterlife of our projects, of our processes, becoming so important to address the ephemerality, and hopefully in the longer run address anybody being overshadowed or, but as Matheus rightly said, in the business of history, you will eventually leave out, you will overshadow, and somebody else will come and rewrite and write histories. But yes, definitely an effort towards that is what I was trying to generate here. Okay, as promised, I am done holding the fort, and we want new thoughts. Sophie is also here, so more questions, more people to answer the questions.
Hello. Hi, I'm Mira. Thank you for your presentations, and they were all very interesting, and I'm excited to look at the e-museum in more depth. I was wondering, so I think, as far as I know, like, so a lot of the, both the aesthetics and the technologies and commodities involved in modernist design and art came from some of it came from extractive processes to do with colonialism. So your work is kind of bringing the sort of latter end of the relationship between modernism and Sao Paulo or Bangalore to bear. But the earlier part of that relationship, that is the ideas in the coming from from colonial 19th century essentially into the production of 20th century design. Was that something that appeared in your work or your thoughts while you were working on these projects?
May I?
Matheus, because you were nodding your head, we are presuming you want to start.
Yeah, no, this is something that is really, really connects with my practice and the way that I think. Thank you for the question. It's a great question. I think that for me, the history of Brazilian cultural development, in a way, is of importing, of course. So it's like seeing the role models in Europe and trying to bring them to Brazil. And it was really clearly stated, we need to modernize Brazil. So let's grab what is happening in Europe and apply to the Brazilian society. This was said, like it's not an interpretation. This is pretty clear. So the thing is, Brazilian society is absolutely different from European society. And I think we can all relate here, talking about the global South in a way, that we are not Europe. We have a different way of thinking about our constitutions as persons, as person and a society, and how the society is built and so on. So I do believe that importing European aesthetics to Brazil, for instance, was like it created a paradox, because in a way we are a very modern country, but at the same time in the 18th century and so on, we were still dealing with slavery. So the most anti-capitalist thing ever, while we are capitalists as well. So in a way, we lived a contradiction that was brought to life when we got, for instance, European art as a model and trying to apply it to the Brazilian society. It didn't fit, it didn't work. So I think the Brazilian art, the Brazilian art that I like the most, is the one that works in this shift. You know, when you get, like, for instance, a good example is like the idea of the concretism that was brought with Concrete by Max Biel and so on to Brazilian design, which is really inspired Brazilian design, but then it became a sardine can with the picture of a fish, you know? So it's not about the same ideas, they're not the same context. Brazilian society is completely different. So I think in a way, this kind of colonialism was taken into account in my perspective, because what we imported as aesthetics and as art really didn't fit the society. So we need to learn how it doesn't fit and how to work in this gap. For me, my work is trying to emphasize that. In a way, my work is about the gap between the two screens, and, you know, what is in the middle there. This is the most important thing for me.
Hi, I'm Indira, and I really appreciated this discussion because I think it took us to different places centered from the Museum of Gestaltung in Zurich. And yes, I too am looking forward to looking at the e-museum. I was curious because when I saw the title, and you referred to that, Ishita, the idea of the ephemeral histories makes you think of the lost voices. And so that echoed very much with what you were talking about, Osmond, of capturing voices that are marginalized or not, don't have a space to express themselves. But then we had Matheus's presentation, which was so interesting because of these great characters like Max Bill and Faulkner that you talked about, who were you know, sort of iconic designers, are suddenly lost in a museum. And so that really does make one think about the filters that archives apply in order to select what they represent. And yes, there's money, there's choice, there's curatorial choices and all of those things. But I was curious, and actually my question then leads to Sophie, which is, do you think then that the Museum for Gestaltung will then, in this seeking of plurality and the seeking of voices from the global south, will sort of change the way in which it accumulates its collection?
Thank you for that great question. I think for me it ties into a comment Ishita made before. So I came from the decorative arts collection. I'm an art historian for textiles originally, which has always been, or as we studied, was always developed or in this kind of global network or system of creation, trade, and also usage, which was then already very early on market specific. And then as a next step, what happened was that I got this project called digital collecting, which meant that I would look at the collection of the museum is actually 4 collections, which is each headed by a curator. So it's poster, decorative art, graphic design, as well as product design. The graphic design and the decorative arts are the very early one from the 19th century because they were used in the school to teach design, or actually at that time also arts and crafts. And then my challenge was to develop criteria for collecting digital design, which in its nature and how it's created nowadays, a lot of it is ephemeral. So if I am in touch with a designer and I ask him for documentation of a work that's maybe 5 years old, I would be very lucky if it still exists, because it's much more transient, it's much more dynamic. And I do think that the design process there is differently. And then what I've done is actually, which was a little bit my step into the curatorial work, is to think of documentation formats primarily, to look at how can we as an institution also use our resources to produce documentation. So for example, I'm finishing a film now about a textile artist who works a lot with architecture because she uses computer programming. And we have a whole library for kind of analog techniques, but we don't really have documented how technology nowadays is used for art and design. And it's a little bit developing in parallel, also because this exhibition, Museum of the Future, is a research project that's been going on for 3 years. I've worked on it. So the Swissnex projects, there are 6, but all in all, there are 18 exhibition areas and about 30 commissions. So it's very broad. It's very much a spectacle that is tied in by looking at this paradoxes of what is exhibitable. And then what I've realized is that one of the categories when archiving is not just in the sense of relevance, which is always very difficult when you have to collect contemporary time frames, where you cannot look at, because most of us are trained as art historians, so we're used to looking retrospectively at archives, other archives, written documents, and kind of already do this. What is a contextual object? What is a contrary object? So what I'm confronted with is that has not developed yet. So what do we collect? And for us, it also means that we are responsible for a conservatorship with analog objects. The high ideal is for forever, and with digital objects, we're looking at 50 years. So if you try to open a Word document from 10 years ago, you're already going to have difficulties because also the dependencies are there. So what I try to do is document as extensively as possible, which also led a little bit to this project of using the framework of collaborations, of commissioning works, which means also that they're very site-specifically developed for an exhibition. Because now I'm thinking of what could be other platforms or opportunities to showcase these researches, which are all behind these works, which are very extensively. And usually that is me asking for all of the documentation that exists that I then can archive it with. And then it becomes the next decision that I make with the collection curators is what is archived as documentation and what has an object status. Because that then also means internally within the institution, it's being treated differently. But what I've discovered, is that there's much more fluidity between documentation and the work that is presented than with analog objects. And it's also a continuous discussion of looking at this criteria and seeing how it develops of, do we have to adapt them? So for example, with digital collecting, we have a framework for the criteria that are time limited, actually until the end of 25. And what happens then is that you all sit together again and you see, are they still current? Do they need to be extended or do we need to loosen them up? So that's a little bit my answer to that question. And I think for me, the role with this project, which is very moving for me also today, this final moment, is it's been very self-initiated. So there has not been a framework also within the institution for this project. So, but what I was able, or what we were able to do is use another research project who looks at the future of museology and place this initiative within it. But I also agree with Bhavana or Osmond. I think Matheus said it's very site-specific. I think the works could be presented in another format or in another exhibition because there's so much in them. And for me, what is very special and what comes into play, and I think that these works, that there's really been also a relationship between me and the artists that is somehow reflected in the work, that it's been very much a dialogue of me bringing this knowledge that I could find in the archive and make it available, is that the curator is being a facilitator. And then there's also, for example, we have exhibition curators and we have collection curators. And I'm more of the type of a collection curator because I collect and I have to think about how do we document digital or hybrid objects where there's not been a standard practice or a set workflow. And at the same time, how do we produce something within this commissioning framework that invites a specific authorship and give also a certain autonomy and then exhibit it. So this initiative has been kind of an experiment, maybe less so with digital technologies, but within the museological practice, very much so. I think I answered your question and said a lot more too, so I hope that was fine.
And I think I'm just adding a thought to this very interesting answer, Sophie, that you gave, is also that what you have created through this collaboration is not just products or artworks, but experiences. And experiences will get archived and curated and documented, hopefully differently, and bring in more representation, as Indira was asking. I hope so, because these are experiences, or they bring more communities and people together. So I think, yeah, to close, as I said, I don't have any concluding remarks. I think I appreciate that all of us have sat through almost for 2 hours, and we appreciate such dialogues of new forms of collaborations, practices across the screen, across the borders. And I think I've said it in our internal conversation. I was sharing with a friend today that I hope more of these happen, where we all see beyond the product, is what I was really referring to, Sophie, that we see beyond the product, but really invest our energies into processes which are exploratory, interpretative, whether it's through a museum or an archive or some other patron, which will help us relook at design and art. With that optimism, thank you all for joining us. And as Divya said, conversations continue. Thank you.